Greetings to all. Welcome to the Self-Knowledge course. Today we are going to talk about the ego, the personality, and the essence. The objective of this topic is to help us learn how to distinguish the activity of each of these three aspects of our psychology. To learn to observe and to recognize in each of our actions when the ego is manifesting, when the essence is manifesting, and when the personality is manifesting, so that we may identify them clearly in the moment of self-observation. To understand these three aspects, we will analyze them one by one. But before we continue, let us consider the different kinds of acts that exist, because there are three. First, the acts of the ego or recurrences. These happen when we are unaware of our inner world. Instead of our consciousness guiding us, our psychological defects, the ego, take control. These acts repeat themselves again and again. Each time they repeat, the ego grows stronger, and the consequences become heavier. As we saw in the lecture on the law of recurrence, the ego causes us to repeat the same actions, make the same decisions, and commit the same mistakes life after life. These are mechanical acts of the ego that keep us trapped in a loop day after day. When we enter a new existence, we arrive with a fixed destiny. Everything we will experience is already written, including how we will react, because we act under the ego's conditioning. Second, there are the accidents. Accidents happen because our consciousness is asleep. We are distracted and fascinated. These acts are not part of our fate line. For example, it may not be destined for us to be hit by a car at age 25. But if in this life we develop the defect of always being absorbed in our cell phone, even walking while looking at it, and cross the street without caution, we might be accidentally hit by a car. This accident then creates a new recurrence. So in the next life, at the same age, we will be similarly absorbed by some technology, perhaps more advanced, but the defect will be the same, causing the same recurring behavior and consequence. Third, there are conscious acts. These are the acts that prevent accidents from happening. They stop new recurrences and allow us to break free from the ego's mechanical patterns. Conscious acts free us from the recurrences and their consequences that we carry from the past. For conscious acts to take place, we must make continuous and deliberate efforts to awaken our consciousness at every moment. Now let us examine the ego, the personality, and the essence in detail so we can deepen our understanding of these aspects. What is the ego? The ego is known by many names. Some of these you might have heard before, but perhaps you haven't realized that they all point to the same thing, the ego within us. For example, the ego is called eyes or selves. This refers to the many different ways we are inside ourselves. We can observe them always appearing in us. The moody eye, the flirtatious eye, the impatient one, the distracted, the optimistic, the lazy, the envious, the coward, the tyrant, and so on. All of these are parts of our ego, and they present themselves within us in the first person. I am, I feel, I desire, etc. These in Buddhism are known as the psychological aggregates, since they are not something inherent to our psyche, but rather elements that have been added to it throughout our multiple existences. But also the ego is known as psychological defects or errors, since these are the flawed parts within us that lead us to act wrongly, causing harm to others and to ourselves. They are also known as desires and temptations, the urges we constantly feel that drive us to give in to our lowest instincts. Often we try to blame these on an external force, a Satan or demon outside of ourselves. But when we truly understand that what we call God and the devil are not outside but live within us, we see that this devil, or Satan, is nothing other than the ego inside each of us. In ancient Egypt, these were called the red demons of Seth. In Christianity, the ego is known as sins. We recognize the 7 deadly sins: laziness, greed, lust, pride, anger, gluttony, and envy. These 7 sins represent the main heads of the legion that is our ego. The ego is also known as injustice, ignorance, pain, and suffering. It is the ego that makes us act unfairly, that keeps us trapped in ignorance, and that causes us to suffer. It is also called inner darkness, trapped consciousness, and is linked to our mental concepts. All these names point to what is the ego, or the psychological I. In short, the ego is everything within us that leads to error, harm, and suffering: hatred, resentment, impatience, vanity, selfishness, envy, violence, lies, betrayal, vices, sentimentality, attachments, fears, concepts, beliefs, etc. All these manifest in us moment by moment. All of this is part of our ego, and it is what keeps our consciousness trapped and conditioned. If we do not eliminate the ego, we will never develop our consciousness, since 97% of our essence is trapped within all those different flawed ways of being in our interior. It is important to know that the psychological eyes were born from all the impressions we receive from the external world, impressions that we failed to transform properly in any of our existences. Every time we faced a situation and became fascinated or identified with it, the energy we put into that created each one of our eyes. Over time, and through each of our existences, these eyes have grown stronger, because whenever we lack self-observation or self-awareness, we allow them to manifest within us and feed on the energy from our centers. The psychological eye has a molecular nature. It belongs to the fifth dimension, which is the world of our emotions and thoughts. That is why in the physical world we cannot see an emotion or a thought, though no one doubts their reality. Likewise, no one can physically see the ego when it manifests from the fifth dimension through desire and justification. But from there, it takes control of our personality, and through the personality, it takes control of our physical body. This leads us to act based on the conditioning of the eye that is manifesting, which causes us to generate karma. Each eye has its own personality. Each one has its own unique way of being. We can see, for example, that our angry eye manifests a very different personality than our happy eye, or our fearful eye, or our lustful eye. Something else that we must understand about the ego is that there are new eyes and old eyes. In these last existences, we've created many eyes that we didn't have before. For example, in other lives, we didn't have the ego of the telephone or the cell phone. That eye that feeds on all the energy we give it by spending hours and hours on those devices, until we become addicted. That eye that makes us feel anxious if we leave our cell phone behind, and that makes us suffer terribly if we lose it. But also, in this existence, we've created eyes like the driver, the gamer, the one who watches pornography, the one on social networks, and so on. We can see how all this so-called technological advancement gives us the illusion that we're evolving. But internally, it's actually precipitating us into involution. Because if we reflect on it, we'll realize that these advances have only served to degenerate us more and more, creating new eyes and at the same time feeding all our old eyes even more. Because we also carry very old psychological eyes. We can see, for example, the eye of laziness, which is like the father of them all. Within the details of the lazy ego, we find very old eyes like the partying eye, the funny eye, the bored eye, the disobedient eye, the distracted eye, and many more. And if we analyze this closely, we'll see how these new eyes end up feeding the old ones. We could take the example of the eye that plays video games and see how this not only feeds many very old eyes of laziness, like leisure and distraction, but also feeds murderous eyes, vengeful eyes, cruel eyes, thieving eyes, and so on, depending on the kind of impression we receive from them. Because in this virtual reality, we do everything freely and often indirectly feed some of the heaviest eyes in our psychology, those that, maybe because of our current personality, no longer manifest directly. And it is that the ego evolves. Even in a single life, we can verify the evolution of an eye. We can take, for example, lust. The first time that lust manifested in us in this existence, it may have been something as simple as leering at someone of the opposite sex, the lascivious eye. Then it evolves, and the eye that watches pornography appears. Then the eye that masturbates. Then the eye that fornicates with a partner. But it doesn't stop there. From simple fornication, it moves to oral sex. Then to anal sex. And in some cases, even within the same life, it can evolve into the homosexual eye, the celibate eye, the pedophile eye, and so on. The eye always evolves in its degeneration. And with each existence, its molecular weight increases, and its force of manifestation becomes stronger, especially if we never decide to work on it and eradicate it from our psychology. But it is important to know that all the eyes can be eliminated. And for this, we must remain constantly vigilant, living in a continuous state of self-observation, to discover them as they manifest. As desires in our emotions, in our thoughts, in our words, in our actions, and even in our omissions. We must observe what each eye does, why it does it, when it appears, and little by little, moment by moment, recognize these as egoic manifestations. And then, ask our particular Divine Mother to eliminate them from our psychology. This procedure is known as psychological death. And it is the way through which we can free ourselves from the ego. It is what will allow us to liberate the essence, and to release the energy that becomes the raw material with which we can create ourselves internally and achieve the second birth. If we don't decide to work on ourselves to eliminate the ego, then, when our human existences come to an end, we will inevitably have to go through the process of involution, as we studied in Lesson 8. And there, in involution, all the I's will die, but painfully and involuntarily. That process can take thousands of years, and though eventually our essence will emerge cleansed, it will not have been able to rescue the wisdom from that entire turn on the wheel of samsara. From there, the innocent essence will simply come out again, ready to be connected once more to the wheel, to turn one more time. That is why it is so important to understand the need to eliminate the ego within a single human existence, if we truly want to become free. The ego makes us commit countless mistakes. It exhausts our energy. It causes all kinds of recurrences. It keeps us trapped in repetition, living the same situations over and over again. And worst of all, it prevents us from advancing toward our inner being. Each I brings with it karmic accounts, debts to be paid, and collections to be made. If we don't work on ourselves, we will keep repeating the same lessons again and again without ever learning from them, and without ever transcending those difficult situations. To observe the manifestations of the ego in us, we must learn to watch the different desires that arise throughout the day. By doing this, we can discover which I causes each desire and understand that part of our consciousness is trapped in that defect. We experience all kinds of desires during the day. The desire to drink, the desire to fight, the desire to do nothing, the desire to masturbate, the desire to criticize, and more. If we learn to deny ourselves these constant desires of the ego, we will stop being slaves to desire, and we will rescue the light that is wisdom, and the fire that is love and encouragement, which is the power to act in pursuit of consciousness. Now that we already know what the ego is, let's see what the personality is. The personality is the energetic vehicle that allows our psychological defects to manifest in us. When a baby is born, he doesn't have a created personality, he doesn't have a way of being. He simply is. Because of this, psychological defects cannot manifest in him yet. That's why the baby enjoys that unique beauty. In the baby, only the 3% of free consciousness is expressing itself. But as the child grows, he begins creating his personality, and then he starts forming a way of being. By around 7 years of age, he has completely created his personality, which from that point on, will be strengthened for the rest of his life. Through the personality, all the eyes can openly enter the person. Personality is born in time and dies in time. There is no future for personality. It is formed in each existence so that the eyes manifest in the physical body. In each new existence, we create a new personality, and with the death of the physical body, the death of that personality also comes. The personality is formed through imitation. What children see, children do. The child observes everything around him like a sponge, absorbing what he sees his parents, siblings, friends, and others doing, and imitates them. The child begins by imitating accents and gestures, but also begins to imitate the reactions of others, and starts to develop a concept of what is right and what is wrong. For example, if the child sees that his mother yells all the time, gets angry, reacts violently, then the child internalizes this behavior and repeats it according to the electropsychic design he carries. If he sees that his father strives constantly to get money and rejects people who don't have money, then the child begins to believe that not having money is wrong, something to be ashamed of. And so he grows imitating his school friends, acquaintances, and other relatives. He imitates what he sees on television, on the internet, and so on, and creates his personality, his way of being. The child begins to develop new concepts with which he identifies himself, forming the I am like this. From then on, he begins to worship the personality. He starts saying things like, the best music is the one I listen to. My country is the best country. The football team I support is the best. The religion I practice is the true one. Many such concepts are defended to the death because by defending them, he feels he is defending himself. When we become fascinated with personality, we lose connection with our own spirit, our own consciousness, and become completely identified and defined by our personality. We become very conditioned by what others will say. We behave in certain ways, show a facade or mask, which is the personality, to maintain a reputation, to be spoken well of, to be held in high esteem, or out of fear of criticism and rejection. With each physical body, we create a new facade, a new personality, with a new first name, last name, education, economic status, culture, tastes, interests, customs, habits, and so on. Our personality is also shaped by all the concepts instilled in us, or that we embraced while growing up. The problem is that since we tend to confuse consciousness with our concepts of what is good or right, we easily assume we are acting consciously when we are merely acting according to a concept and not according to the wisdom and love that is discovered when we have observed the psychological defect present within us and eliminated it. Our personality is made up of all these elements related to the culture, the socioeconomic level of the place where we were born, and the family we were born into. Reflect on the fact that, in your previous existences, all these elements may have been different, even though your essence and even your ego were the same. But this personality has multiple fractions, it has many ways of being, since each psychological self has its own personality. We may notice that the aspect of personality that emerges when one is happy is totally different from the one expressed when one is sad, bored, angry, or scared. Our personality today is just a servant at the service of the ego. The real problem with personality is that it keeps us hypnotized. It convinces us that what truly matters in life are external things: vanity, money, status, luxury, careers, business, appearances. If, as children, we were taught that money was the most important thing, then we grow up completely fascinated by wealth, how to get it, how to show it, and we build our entire lives around that belief. If we were taught that family is everything, then we dedicate ourselves to that, convinced it's the most meaningful part of existence. If we were told that what matters is standing out, being different, being the best, then that's what we chase, constantly comparing ourselves, trying to be more than others. In each case, we become obsessed with what we were conditioned to value, and in doing so, we forget the most essential truth. The real purpose of our life is the development of consciousness. But instead, we lose ourselves in illusions, running after empty goals, and wasting the precious opportunity this existence gives us. That's why it's important to understand that there are two types of personality. The first is what we call the active personality. This is the one that most people have, and it functions as a servant of the ego. For example, let's say lust wants to express itself. The personality will step in to make that happen in a socially acceptable way. Instead of going straight to the raw desire, it filters and refines it, finding a way to speak sweetly, flirt, promise love and loyalty, and put on a whole performance. But underneath it all, the real intention is just to satisfy lust. In this way, the active personality helps each psychological I express itself through us, and keeps us completely identified with our defects, trapped in their patterns. But there is another kind of personality, and this is the one we must develop. It's what we call the passive personality. This begins to form when we stop reacting blindly to our desires and start observing them. When instead of rushing to obey a defect, we pause, we reflect. For example, someone might offer you a shady business deal, promising a lot of money. Normally, you'd respond without thinking, maybe out of greed, or out of fear of what others might say. But the passive personality allows you to observe first. You watch your mind as it starts justifying the idea, your emotions as they fill with fear or excitement, your body as it tenses up or gets anxious. And then you recognize what's happening. This is a defect, the thief I, trying to take control. And if in that moment you consciously reject it, if you ask for its elimination, then your consciousness can manifest instead. You'll be able to respond from a place of clarity, not compulsion. This is how the passive personality works. It becomes a receptive instrument, listening for the guidance of your inner being. And instead of serving the ego, it begins to serve the light of your own consciousness. Now let's talk about something fundamental, the essence. The essence is what's real in us. It's the true, the immortal part of our being. And in truth, it's the only thing that has genuine value. It has always been the same, from the very moment we emerged from the sacred absolute sun. It is who we really are, beyond the ego, beyond the personality. Unlike the ego, which is a collection of defects, and unlike the personality, which is shaped by time and culture, the essence is not born in time, and it doesn't die in time. It is eternal, unchanging, permanent. It doesn't act according to what others think or say. It doesn't depend on trends or pressure or fear. The essence always acts consciously, guided by what is just, what is useful, what is true. And it has one purpose, to awaken all of our consciousness. 100% of our essence is immortal, but it's divided into two parts. There is a 3% that is free and self-conscious, that is our consciousness. And then there's the other 97%, which is trapped within our psychological defects. When the essence is free, we call it consciousness because it holds wisdom. But when it's trapped, we simply call it essence because the word essence here symbolizes our innocence, the pure, untainted core of our being. It is precisely this innocence that allowed the essence to be captured by the ego, so it could gain experience and eventually awaken wisdom. Our work is first to awaken that 3% that remains asleep within us. Then little by little, through the process of psychological death, we release the trapped essence and bring it into consciousness. This is the true reason for our existence. When we were little and our personality hadn't yet formed, that 3% of consciousness was still awake. But by the time we reach around 7 years old, when we start to fully use reason, that 3% falls asleep. After that, only in rare cases do we hear again the voice of consciousness. Now, our task is to awaken that consciousness once more. We awaken and develop it by practicing the 3 factors of the revolution of consciousness. What is the essence seeking? Against the desires of the ego and the personality, the essence will always strive to free all trapped essences through the practice of psychological death, to unite them with the 3% of free consciousness through spiritual birth, by practicing supersex. And it will also seek to help awaken other human brothers and sisters by selflessly dedicating time and effort to share the teaching of the 3 factors. This is the entire purpose and work of our being. When we give true value to this work, we can develop our spiritual nature, truly know ourselves, and fully self-realize our being. Now let's see how to differentiate the ego, the personality, and the essence. It is very important that we learn to distinguish them, and I will give you an example so you can recognize when each one acts. Suppose we walk down a street and meet someone we didn't want to see because we owe them money. How does the ego manifest in that situation? The ego is all the reactions that arise within us. The desire to hide, the anger at having encountered that person, the hatred it generates in us, the shame, the desire to lie. These are all manifestations of the ego in that moment. How does personality manifest? Personality is the facade we put on. Even feeling all of that inside, we smile at the person, greet them politely, ask about their family, while feeling terrible annoyance inside. That pleasant face is the personality's mask in that situation. And how could the essence manifest? For the essence, which is the real part of us, wisdom and love, to manifest, we must be in self-observation to discover all those psychological defects appearing as emotions and thoughts and recognize how personality drives our behavior and speech. Only by eliminating everything false in us can the real manifest, rescuing consciousness and wisdom from the situation. Then the essence will guide us to act consciously, free from conditioning by ego or personality. The essence's action cannot be reduced to a fixed concept because it is the real and true in us, always new and unknown moment to moment. Only in a specific situation, after removing egoic manifestations, will we discover the spontaneous conscious action to take. Consciousness is not mechanical. It cannot be measured, conceptualized, or confined to moral rules. What is conscious in one situation and context may not be in another. Consciousness arises spontaneously and is beyond good and evil. It is now up to us to put this into practice through self-observation to learn to identify who is acting in each of our deeds. And that has been today's topic. In the next topic, we will go deeper into self-observation. We will learn to distinguish self-observation from knowing, thinking, and external observation by analyzing the fact that we live in 2 parallel worlds, the internal and the external. In that lecture, we will learn everything about this important practice that allows us to make radical changes in our psychology. See you at the next conference.